In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 105 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is relationships. Our quote of the day comes to us from Anthony J. D'Angelo. Treasure your relationships, not your possessions. I'm excited to bring you today's episode. Our guest, Jeffrey Shaw, discusses the importance of relationships and shares some little niblets about why it is so important to find your ideal clients and customers. In addition to being a successful podcast host, author, speaker, and coach, Jeffrey also ran a very successful photography company. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jeffrey, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So the first question we ask is, are you ready to bring it today?
Absolutely. I mean, I wake up ready to bring it.
I knew that'd be your answer in some way. So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you had either a story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you when you could have given up or given in, but you didn't and you kept on going.
Well, you know what? I often say perseverance and resilience are the two most important characteristics of being an entrepreneur, and just in life, you just got to keep on going. So believe me, Chris, I have many, many stories, and I would say I'm even living one now. I think anytime we transition from one thing to another, there's a trial period. And, I've got a lot going on in my life right now concerning my career direction. And anytime we make changes, it requires perseverance. But I'll share the story that it really is the preface of my book, LINGO. It's kind of the basis of the entire book. And I tell this story in the beginning because I think it's a story a lot of us can relate to. So as a photographer, I've been a photographer for 33 years. Currently now, primarily my role is as a business coach and author and a speaker. But I'm still doing a little photography. But when I set out as a photographer 33 years ago at 20 years old, I went back after photography school. I went back to my hometown, which was a small town a couple hours north of New York City, with ambitions to be a pretty high-end, whatever it meant to be a high-end photographer. I just knew I was producing a quality product, and it was important to have family photos, and I was going to charge top dollar, at least what I thought top dollar was for this very, lower middle-class area. Struggled for 3 years, wanted to quit repeatedly. I mean, it was torture. It was the toughest 3 years. I tell the story actually in the introduction of LINGO how I developed a fear of banks because I would go to the bank nervous, wondering whether I had enough money in the business account to transfer to my personal account. And so many times I would get up to that teller, because this is pre-ATMs, the teller would say to me, "You don't have the money." And I'm looking to transfer $150 from my business account to my personal account just to make it through the week. And the money wasn't there. So believe many, many times of quitting, the turning point for me, and boy, this is something when it comes to close to quitting, Chris, I think an important thing for people to understand is your life and your day and your feelings about committing can change on a dime. And that's what happened to me. I was at my wit's end, not able to make ends meet, not able to pay myself. I had a woman in my studio. I made the best pitch I possibly could as to why she should hire me as a photographer, to photograph her family and have photographs to hand down to her children. And she looked at me and she goes, "That sounds nice and all, but I don't have the luxury of worrying about my children's memories. I don't know how I'm paying my rent this month." That was a turning point moment for me because I realized, okay, the reason this isn't working is I'm barking up the wrong tree. I'm literally trying to sell a luxury product in a market who doesn't know if they can pay their rent. And this is my hometown. I grew up here. I knew that in my bones, but I stupidly, like a lot of us do, built the wrong business, or maybe the right business, but in the wrong place. And what that told me in that instant was that it became very clear to me, I'm a luxury product. People don't have to have family photographs. It's a luxury. I needed to shift my business and recreate it as a luxury product in a luxury market. And then that's the entire premise of my book Lingo, because it was in that moment I decided I needed to understand how high-end brands operated, and even more importantly, what was the mindset of the people that chose luxury products and brands. I needed to understand how they behaved, what their lingo was, how they saw the world. So I set about for 3 months to study what the affluent market experienced in the world, so I could then build a business for them in a different town in Connecticut and start all over again. So I didn't quit. And I think this is an important distinction here. Sometimes it's not quitting, but restarting. Did I close the previous business? Yes. And start a new one? Yes. But it was never a quit for me. It was just a transition from one place to another.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I appreciate your candor. Is quitting is when you fully give up, I believe, by definition. But what you did, I think, is you switched lanes and you realized sooner than later that you were doing the right things in the wrong market. And I think maybe for our listeners that are either entrepreneurs themselves or possibly thinking about starting up a business, the importance is not only do you have the right business model, the right people in your corner next to you, but you need to be in the right markets, because I think that's something that you figured out earlier than later. And I think there's probably a lot of people, unfortunately, that figure that out either never or way too late, and all of a sudden they've spent a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And as you know, that could be disastrous in many ways. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us. Yeah,
and you're absolutely right. It's because it's all about alignment. It's the right thing for the right people in the right place. And honestly, 99%, I don't know what the factual percentage is, but I'm going to say 99% of businesses are built backwards, and particularly entrepreneurial businesses, because somebody has an idea, they have a concept, they have an idea for a business, and they're so excited about that idea, they create the product, they create the service, they build the business, and then they spend 5 to 7 years trying to fit people into that business, and it's not working, and they want to quit. The entire basis. So let me just preface the goal of my book Lingo is for businesses to work with their ideal customers, just their ideal customers, busting up the 80-20 rule and saying, forget the 80-20 rule. We can't afford for 8 out of 10 customers to be the wrong customers. We need all our customers to be ideal customers. So the right way to accomplish that is to, hey, I have an idea. I know the type of business I want. You want to define who's the ideal customer for that business, know everything about them, all their emotional trigger points, their priorities, their values, their lifestyle, what I refer to as their lingo, which captures all that, and then build a business for them, build a brand that shines above everybody else because it's speaking their language, have the services that they want. Then you've just made business a whole lot easier. You've actually built a business for the people that want what you have to offer.
If you wouldn't mind, if you could very briefly just share the 80-20 rule with our listeners in case some of them don't know what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So it's known as the Pareto principle. So the 80-20 rule, it states that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. And you know what? I'm not going to argue that there isn't some truth to it. I think it's time to let it go. I think there's a lot of economic systems. One could say that about our country's economic system. The top tier of wealth pays a greater percentage of the taxes. They may not pay their fair share. That's a whole other topic. They may not pay their fair share, but they do generate a tremendous amount of the income tax. And but as well as it's always been true in business. I just think it's an old principle. There's some facts to it, but I think from an entrepreneurial small business perspective, we need to think differently, because what I think this has done is it's caused a lot of entrepreneurs to continue to put up with the idea that some of their customers just don't pay out. They don't pay what they're worth. Some of the customers aren't worth the time, and there's a certain amount of acceptance of that, and then it becomes a downward spiral, because as soon as you get into business, as soon as you get into the mindset in business that you need to take what comes along, then you get into more of a scarcity mindset. You get more, the more less profitable customers you have, the more your business is spiraling downward, which makes you more desperate to take whatever work comes along. And it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you spoke on the scarcity mindset, because one of the things we often talk about is abundance, and why it's so important to think abundantly with not only your personal life, your business, your finances. But I wanted to touch on the 80-20 rule, because it's interesting that you said that, because I studied the 80-20 rule many years ago when I first got into the business world, and it's you get 80% of your revenue from 20% of your clients, and I always thought that there was a better way to do it. So it's interesting. I have your book in front of me, and the title obviously is Lingo, and then I guess the underneath it says, "Discover your ideal customer's secret language and make your business irresistible." And I like reading different books, and I appreciate you sent me a signed copy a couple days ago, and I read it, and I would definitely recommend it for our clients that are in the business world or entrepreneurial space, or even just looking to understand things a little bit differently. But I think in today's day and age of technology, one of the things that we often touch on at No Quit Living is everybody's familiar with the adage 6 degrees of separation. I feel where technology is you're 1 degree separated from your ideal client or prospect or next business partner, what have you. And I think what we have the ability to do today, and per a lot of the items that you touch on in your book, and you and I spoke about near the end of your book, you have some really cool things, starting with the conclusion, and then some things that are kind of interesting. And again, I don't want to go too much into it because I hope our listeners will take the recommendation and either get a copy of the book or listen to it on audiobook. But I just love how you break it down into finding the ideal customers. And I don't care if you're starting off a business today or if you're looking to take your business to the next level, is if you're in any sales capacity where you need clients and customers to either come in your door or buy your products and services, at the end of the day, beginning of the day, it comes down to one thing, is getting the right clients and getting consistent numbers in and out of your business or doors. So I really think it's an interesting concept that you wrote about. If I could just ask you, was it just from your history or was it something that you've studied, or what led you to actually write Lingo?
Primarily my history. What I felt like did when I reinvented my business and started over again, I got really clear on who I was for. So chapter number 2 in Lingo, the title of it is Who Would Love That? There's kind of a funny aside story to this. So the book was entirely written in the hands of my editor, which of course involves some rewriting. But it was then that I started doing a lot of podcast interviews, and this is last fall. And it was when I started getting on podcast interviews that a lot of the hosts were asking me one question over and over again. And they were asking me, well, how do we know who our ideal customer is? And I realized I never addressed this in the book. I wrote the entire book with the assumption that people know who their ideal customer is, thinking that most of the people I work with as a business coach have been in business for a while, and they're coming to me because their business isn't working the way they'd like. I would love to work with more startups, but unfortunately, enough startups don't think about the importance of knowing who their ideal customer is. They're so excited about the business they're building, which is why I said most are built backwards. So I realized, gosh, this isn't really in the book. So I went back and rewrote what became chapter 2, which is Who Would Love That? And that says it all. I didn't write how to define your ideal customer. I could have. But the way to define your ideal customer is to know what your innate characteristics are. Like, what about you just makes you who you are, and who would love that? What's your skill set? What is it that you're so good at that you have this thing to offer, and who would love that? Where are they? What place, what's the market? How do you reach them, and who would love that? It all comes down, that's actually how you define your ideal customer. It has less to do with them initially and more to do with you, so that you're leveraging all your strengths, your personal characteristics, your skill set, where you are, the market, how you can serve best, the change you can make, the product you can offer. It's actually starts with a lot more self-reflection, and then ask yourself the question, okay, and then who would love that? Where are they? How do they think? What's their mindset? How do I find them? And how do I reach them? So to your point, majority of, we have to think about online business. And the fact of the matter is, people have we whiz through things online, which is why it's all the more important to know who your ideal customer is, so you can get their attention right away. So for me, the book comes from a deep personal experience, because when I reinvented my business, I made a decision. I was only going to work with, the top tier of clientele who appreciated what I had to offer. Another really funny little story, but I'll make it really quick. There's a diamond-shaped period at the end of my name, which is my logo in my business name, and that exists there because when I was reinventing my business, knowing who I was building it for, I was working with a graphic designer who wanted me to call the business Jeffrey Shaw and Associates, Jeffrey Shaw Photographers. He kept saying, "Well, you're going to want other photographers in the future." And I knew that wasn't the business I was building for the clientele I wanted to reach, because what was important to them is that they had me, that they were buying like almost a designer name. And I said to him, it's Jeffrey Shaw, period. I wanted him to stop making suggestions to me. And he put a period at the end of it, and I just said, to change it to a diamond because it looks richer and we're good. And that's why that diamond is. So I was very clear that I only wanted to work with my ideal customers, and the result of that, as it is a result for all of us, it's the fastest road to a profitable business. Now, it may take a little longer to get going because you're not saying yes to everybody. You're not for everybody. But when you build a business where ultimately your revenue, your profitability is coming from a consistent mindset of a client base, you will have the most profitable business in probably the shortest period of time eventually. Right? It might slower to start off, but you will get to where you want to go and have a solid and profitable business quicker and ultimately easier than any other way.
No, I couldn't agree more than what you just said. Is it's so important to get the ideal customers. And I think, one thing before we switch lanes with the interview is that I think a lot of companies, especially startups, not so much go about it the wrong way, but the reality is they're looking to get their first client, second client. So I think sometimes they focus on the actual client acquisition and the sale as opposed to the ideal client. And I think if anything our listeners take from this interview so far is for those that are looking to take their business to the next level or start a business, is the sooner you can find that ideal client, the better. And then obviously you need to cultivate and continually get the ideal clients, because that's how you not only stay in business, but excel and exceed in business from where you are now to where you want to go. So I appreciate you sharing that. So I want to just change lanes.
Actually, I just want to add one thing to that because I don't want your listeners to be lost. So let me add one thing to that, which is we also have to understand our audiences and ideal customers can change. So if you've been in business 10, 20 years, right, you might need to reevaluate because the psychology of the new ideal customer for you is different. And I just wanted to make sure people understood that it's not a lost cause. No matter how many years you've been in business, you can always pause and then redirect your business to better align with your ideal customer.
And I love the way that you just said the word pause, because we've literally spoken about that probably 3 or 4 times in the last few podcasts. Is there's a difference of giving up versus pausing and then changing lanes. And what happens a lot of times in business and in life in general is you need to re-examine where you are. It's okay to stop and pause and then take a different angle or take a different lane, but you just don't ever give up. So how do you define success?
Oh, gosh. It's one should have a quick answer to that, because you think we would think about it more. How do I define success? I define success by choice. I define success because I have choices and I can make a choice. I moved to Miami Beach 2 years ago on a complete whim. I came down for, having lived in New York City for a lot of years, I came down for three months over the winter and decided never to leave, and realized, in an instant, I realized I had that choice. I had built a life that was virtual enough, my business coaching, and I can be done from anywhere. I do a lot of professional speaking. I'm on planes anyway, that I can fly from anywhere. And even my photography business, I was ready to slow down and do less. And, I shoot entirely on location. So what's the difference if I get in a car or I fly in a plane? So to me, success is about choice. And if I decide tomorrow that I want to make a different choice, that's what makes me successful.
No, I love it, and I love asking that question, because literally I've asked it over 100 times, and I have not yet once gotten the exact same answer. So I appreciate you sharing that. If you had to define yourself in one word, what would that word be?
Unleashed. And I have an answer because I've actually thought about this. And Evan Carmichael, I interviewed him for my podcast, and he has a book called One Word. So it was part. And I don't even remember what my original word was, but after I spoke to him, I realized I had the wrong word. So the one word for me is unleashed. And I say that because it's how I feel. Like I feel like I was kind of born into the world, if you will, and in a very early childhood, feeling very leashed, very confined by my environment, very confined by, I had paralyzing shyness. So I felt very leashed. I felt very limited by what I ever could become in life. I had no expectations for myself at all as a child. Surviving the day was good enough. And, for me, this has been through entrepreneurship, and truly through entrepreneurship, I feel like it's been my biggest measure of personal growth, that I have learned to unleash myself and not give a crap about what anybody else thinks, and just be myself and offer the world what I have and tap into those gifts. And unleash the best of me, which as a result, the work I do now as a business coach and on my podcast and as a speaker, I find unleashes other people. That's my goal. So I've unleashed myself so that I can unleash other people to build these awesome businesses. And the number one response I get when I walk off a stage, people so often come up to me and they say, "Thank you. I feel like you gave me permission." And it took me the longest time to understand what was the permission I was giving people. And I was hearing it so often. And I realized, man, people have a craving. People need to be granted permission, sadly almost. We don't give ourselves, but it's like they're waiting for someone else to grant them permission to be who they are. And I feel as my role as a business coach and as a speaker, what I'm doing is giving people permission to build the business that is a reflection of who they are. They don't have to be confined and leashed by the traditional business model. That there's an audience out there waiting for you to show up for who you are in the business you build. And there's somebody out there who wants to buy your stuff, but they can't buy it until you have exposed who you are and what you have to offer, and then you're unleashed.
No, and I think your word goes hand in hand with your definition of success, so I appreciate you sharing that. So, assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would have listened, what's the one piece of advice you would have given the 20-year-old Jeffrey?
Oh, man. Yeah, what goes in my mind is the choice, and it's an interesting choice, right? So the business side of me would have said, pause and figure out who you're building this business for, right? But on a personal level, which I think is actually more important, I really do. I think I would have said to 20-year-old Jeffrey, be more of who you are and don't give up. Just be more of who you are. There's more in you. Yeah.
I like that. Now, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
What's so interesting about your questions is that my brain immediately splits into, what I could gain if I sat down with somebody business-wise or personal. And I guess I'm going to go personal. I'm going to go with my grandmother. My grandmother was a huge figure in my life, passed, younger than I would have liked. And, she made me feel like the world was bigger. She was my liaison to New York City because I grew up, as I said, about 2 hours north of New York City in the 70s when, New York City, you just assumed you were going to get killed if you went into New York City, or so my parents thought, But luckily I had a grandmother who was just like full of adventures. So I'd go visit her and she'd like, you want to go into New York City? And off we would go. She was crazy, crazy woman and so much fun. So she made my world bigger. So I would love to sit down with her and see today how not only would I'd love to have made her proud. I still believe if we sat down on a bench together, she would even today find more in me than I can find in myself.
Okay, no, that would be an interesting one. Now, what about on a business side? Who would that be?
You said dead or alive, right?
Yes, sir.
It's so classic, but I think I'm going to go with Elon Musk. I'm kind of fascinated by his transparency. There's a lot of business lessons to learn, but I'm actually more fascinated with his transparency. The fact that he, opened up the patents of the battery power that powers the cars so that the world could use it in a bigger way. And I love that. Like, he's not a man that keeps things close to his chest. Maybe he does for a while until he gets it right, but he wants the world to co-own what he knows. And I love that. I think that's very unique, and I'd like to know more about that because I think there's a way. And I'd like to share more. And he would be my choice.
No, it would definitely be an interesting dinner. And he's actually the second most often answered question or answer to that question.
Yeah.
So
I'm not at all surprised.
So before we let you go, I wanted to ask if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
You and I were chatting a little bit before, and I think my parting words are to, it's the whole picture, right? Success is the whole picture. And what I was very clear on what I wanted to do in my book, LINGO, was not just write another business book that gave a lot of strategy. I wanted people to have that, of course, because I felt like I had information, I had knowledge, I had steps I could teach people. So I want people to have good, solid marketing and branding strategies. But the book ends in a very personal development, self-help way. And the reason for that is that what I have seen far too often is that people work really hard, but they hardly get ahead. And the reason for that is they keep layering on the action steps. They keep layering on the information they get from others and their ambition. Because, it takes a lot of ambition to be an entrepreneur, to survive in the world. And I get that. But unless you also develop yourself personally, you will keep running on the hamster wheel. You'll keep bumping up against the glass ceilings and not really getting anywhere. My favorite quote is by Jim Rohn, and that quote is that our level of success rarely exceeds our level of personal development. And I so wholeheartedly believe that. Like when I want to grow in my success, I first challenge myself to grow personally, to show up bigger, to find more in myself than I'm currently offering, to get clear on the work that I can do and what I can offer. And when I do that personal work, it raises the ceiling, and then the success that's been lying right underneath rises to meet that ceiling. So my way to higher levels of success is to always develop myself personally first. And that's what I would love to, my parting words would be to know that journey, to know those steps in proper sequence.
No, you actually killed a couple birds with one stone, because I was going to ask you at some point the quote question, and then we got into the interview, and I had so much fun that I kind of forgot about that. So I'm glad you shared that with us. And I think it comes back to something that we often talk about the show, is the importance of personal development. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people take that and mush it into the category of self-help and some of those things that maybe don't resonate with everybody. But I think it's important to work on yourself personally, professionally, relationship-wise, with your family, with your friend. I mean, there's just so many opportunities, and it's not just that self-help model. And to your point about our conversation before we went live, is that was something that was really unique about your book, is the last good portion of the book has that personal development piece and some pretty neat questions that I wrote down. And I just think it's really interesting how your book went from where it started to where it ended. And it's nice to have a little spin on that. So last question, and I promise it's the easiest one for you, is what's the best way for our listeners to connect and follow you? Obviously, we spoke about your book, Lingo, and I would assume they can get it on Amazon and those type of outlets. And then also would like if you could just briefly share a little bit about your podcast also.
Sure. Well, just to stay aligned with what I'm all about, rather than just, you can find me anywhere, but what I like to give value first and really just give a taste of the way I think, because the whole point of Lingo is for you to have a relationship with your ideal customers, and they in return, where you feel like you get each other. So hey, I want you to get me before we even connect. So I've put together what I call the Lingo Media Kit, and folks can get that at lingomediakit.com. And in that is an infographic of the 5 steps of building the secret language strategy. There's the free chapter on perspective, which is the most important chapter in the book, is to understand the perspective of your ideal customers. And there's a unique audio version of that's kind of kicked up with sound effects and such. So lingomediakit.com. My suggestion is download that, get a feel for what I'm all about. If you like what you see, you'll find me anywhere. I mean, my website's there. Actually, there's even links there to purchase the book, which is available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And then along the way, hopefully you'll find access to my podcast, which is Creative Warriors. Creative Warriors, of course, is on iTunes and Spotify and all the places you'll find podcasts. And Creative Warriors is a podcast geared entirely towards entrepreneurs, small businesses. I generally think of it of folks that in businesses of fewer than 5 people. We cover all the aspects of what I call create, serve, and be prosperous. We talk about creativity and how to create an ideal business. We talk about how to serve people and ultimate customer service. And then the be prosperous part, that is, to me, being prosperous is all about the personal development. It's all about an abundance mindset. So we cover, all our shows fall into one of those 3 categories of create, serve, and be prosperous.
I love it. I think there's no better way than to end the show with that abundant mindset. And I hope that our listeners took a lot today. I definitely took a copious amount of notes myself. And if anything, hopefully our listeners go after that abundant mindset. So thank you, Jeffrey, so much for not only your time, but what you shared with us today.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 105. Jeffrey Shaw is quite an interesting gentleman, and I believe he definitely delivered some great stuff on today's show. One thing he mentioned was the importance of having an abundant mindset. I think we all often fall prey to a just getting by mindset. Jeffrey was adamant in not only finding, but marketing and going after your ideal customer. I know personally many of my clients spend too much time going after and following up with the wrong clientele. Definitely easier said than done, but something I think we should all consider. Jeffrey defined success by choice, and I think that was both a very simple yet profound definition. The question I ask you today is this: are you honestly and truly going after your ideal client and customer base, or are you just looking for that new client as opposed to the right client? My call to action today is for you to take an honest look at your mindset. Do you have an abundant mindset where you excel and live with more than enough, or do you just simply look to just get by? I challenge you today, from this point forward, look, think, act, and believe in abundance. Believe in more than enough, and plan and prepare to succeed beyond your wildest dreams as you go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.